Today's speaker is excited about ideas, and she's open to lots of different ideas. And maybe if you're lucky, at some point, not only will she deliver you a lecture, but we'll hold a festival on the stage in front of you. One never knows. Please welcome from the University of Pittsburgh, Helen Morgan.
How y'all doing this morning? A little bit tired? Does everybody have something to read? Something at all that you might be able to read or borrow from somebody next to you? Could you take that out? Could you stand up? The festival is about to begin. Are you ready? Do you know what you're going to do? Do you know what the name of my lecture is? It's called Speaking. And we're going to start with a little bit of speaking drills. Why don't we try a little bit of the O drill? Do you know what that is? Everybody? Say O in between every word. So if I was going to speak my thing, I would say, so O, I O, was O, thinking O, about O, what O. Get it? Okay? We're going to do this for about a minute and a half. Ready? Go! Oh, that's pathetic! I can hardly hear you! You must be louder! You must enunciate your words! It is early! You can do it! Let's just read 4 words like normal, starting in 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
I never will have to
do I have to say about speaking? What do I want to speak about speaking? Well, I was thinking. I was sitting in my room last night thinking about speaking, and I was thinking about other people speaking, and I was speaking about speaking, and here's what I thought about speaking. I listened to David Berube talk about Native Americans and how their conception of the past is only important insofar as it is existent in the present, right? So that they don't have any conception of the past, only that the past comes to us through our present. And then I was thinking about Jason Jarvis's lecture, and he said that history was something that was important, that when he did research about this topic, he was reminded about our history, that we have to think about our history, that our history is fucked up, that there are things in this topic that are important, and that our history is important to all of those things. And so I put those two things together and said, Native Americans have no conception of the past, and history is important to Native Americans in terms of our relationship to that. And how can we think about this differently? And I thought, well, in terms of speaking, if you would take the Native American perspective and you would take Jason Jarvis's perspective that history is important, then there's something very, very important about speaking, and in particular on this topic. Because if you take the Native American perspective, then that would mean that the history that you speak about through your words, through your discourse, through the language that you choose to use becomes important through the words, through your speech. So history becomes made, created, existent in your speech, in your act, through the present discourse that you use in your debate rounds in your life as you debate this topic. And so I want you to think about that, maybe, and remember that when you speak this year, that the history that we're talking about, that you're making it, that you're talking about it, that you can not necessarily change that history, but you can represent it in a certain way, and you'll interpret it in a certain way, and that your speech will do this. So the first thing that I have to say about speaking today is be careful what you say. When I was talking to people about what I needed to say about speaking last night, a lot of them said this, that, oh my gosh, how many rounds have we lost on what we said that we shouldn't have said? So don't be one of those people. Don't lose rounds because you shouldn't have said something. Don't link yourself up to some sort of critique like a language critique. You should be careful not to use offensive language unless you're ready to defend it. Words like Indian or Native American or Indian country, He-Man language, all of those sorts of things. You need to be very careful about the language that you choose. And not only about individual words, but also your discourse as a whole, as a holistic entity. And the way that you talk about things, the words that you use to describe the Indian situation. You should probably be careful to describe it, not to, if you describe it in negative terms, about what those negative terms are, and how that relates your subject position as you describe them in terms of what the Indian position is. Because if you're not careful, you could get linked up to some sort of discourse critique where they say that you put Indians in negative terms and that denies their agency and legitimacy. But there's also simpler things, of course, that I probably don't have to mention, that your speech can hurt people, and that even the simplest things like saying, that's a ridiculous argument, or that's just silly, can sometimes be really offensive, and people could wage the round on it. I've heard examples of people losing debate rounds on calling things ridiculous arguments, so be careful what you say. And the implications of this are not only negative, there are of course positive implications as well, right? Like if you choose to say things in certain ways, then you might identify with somebody. You might connect to somebody. So this could be true for your judge, the people that you talk to, your debaters, whatever. But be careful what you say, choose your words so that the people that you talk to will understand what you're saying and might connect to you. The second thing is style. In terms of your speaking, you need to develop some sort of style. This is always going to be personal, but you need to develop some sort of personality probably. Who do you want to be? It could be something that you believe is the honest identification of who you are, what you want to put out there. It might just be the debater you, it might be the intellectual you, whatever it is. You should think about the fact that you are creating an identity, a subject position that you're performing on a stage, and you should be that identity when you speak. Think about how you can use your speech to create this identity. There are a couple of things that I think that you could think about in order to do this. The first one is rhythm. There are different rhythms that you could probably experiment with to vary your speech and to become a different type of speaker, right? Like some people speak very in a maybe like straight, linear, sort of iambic pentameter rhythm, like da 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 da, which might be a little bit boring, a little bit industrial. It sort of like conveys a sort of bored sense. Some people are more emphatic and they speak more with different emphasis on different places at different times, and that might create some sort of more impassioned type of argument or something like that. Other people sometimes do speaking drills to some sort of music like hip hop or reggae to develop different types of rhythm. And if you look like in the literature about orality and whatever, rhythm becomes really important to some cultures because it supposedly portrays part of the message, right? That your words aren't only the message, but that your rhythm can also say things too. It can create a sort of, tone or vibe to what it is that you're saying. And so you should think about what kind of vibe that you're looking to create, right? Like if you're running a critique, there's a certain sort of vibe you might want to create, and depending what the critique is, right? If it's a feminist critique, or if it's maybe some, deep postmodern literature critique, or if you're running the politics dis-ed, you're going to have different rhythms, right? Everybody get it? The next thing is breathing. You should find where it's easiest for you to take breaths, and you should probably not double breathe, because most people find that pretty annoying, and you'll probably get low speaker points. Next thing is you need to vary your tone in your voice. You should not just speak in a monotone voice throughout the debate. This includes while you're reading cards, as well as tags and your analytical arguments. You should constantly be varying the tones of your voice so that you can excite the people who are listening to you, so you can wake them up when they're sleeping, etc. Emphasis. Emphasize different power words. This is contextual, depending on the type of argument that you're running, but the words that are powerful for that argument, you should emphasize. You might want to do something like circle them in your cards or extra highlight them, but pay attention to them. Words like war and violence, obviously, but also things like perpetuate and reify. Those sorts of words are power words. Emphasize them. I think that another interesting thing to experiment with is ironic readings. I think that this is largely lost in debate. And if you went back and read half of the evidence that is read in a debate round in an ironic way, you would be amazed with the arguments that are made just by rereading that card. So my advice to you, it would be at some point, if you have the opportunity, take your opponent's card that you and your partner, you go to each other after they read it and you're like, oh my God, this is the most ridiculous card. Do you see what this says? And think about the possibility of just rereading that card in a different way to show that that is an ironic, that how ironic it is that somebody actually meant that to be a true portrayal or representation, so that your reading might show the flaws of that understanding. You might also want to experiment with some sort of sarcasm or satire, which is probably different than irony, but be careful because a lot of times people think that sarcasm is just being mean and rude, but you all know that. The next thing that you should also pay attention to when you're speaking is clarity and organization, of which I'm probably not the best replicant this morning at 9 a.m. for the first lecture. But first one, obviously clarity is key. You're never going to get your message across unless people understand what you're saying. So you have to organize your arguments in some sort of way. Don't forget to number your arguments. I shouldn't have to tell anybody this, but I know that I'll be watching some practice debate rounds tonight, and people won't number their arguments. But number your goddamn arguments, especially the 2AC. My God. Okay. Don't forget the difference between letters and numbers. Hierarchalize your arguments. If you have numbered arguments, but subsets of each number, do a little a little b, a little c. And remember, like larger, more conceptual arguments always flow A, B, C, because it's a if, then this, then that type of thing. and numbered arguments are supposed to denote different types of arguments and separate. So the difference between letters and numbers is important. You should also know what you're going to say before you say it. Don't forget that pre-tournament prep is probably the most important thing for your speaking, more important than probably anything else that you will do during your speech. The pre-tournament prep will be most important. You should take this time to write out your blocks. Think about exactly what you want to say and what the best way to say it is. Edit your blocks. Go back and change them after you have debate rounds and you found that they're ineffective. Change your blocks depending on what type of judge you think you have. If you want to categorize them, or you could even have blocks for different judges if you have a lot of judges that judge you the same time. Pre-tournament prep. Additionally, file organization. If your files are organized, you could probably concentrate more on what you're going to say than finding things that other people said, like your cards, so that you could say them. Just think about what you want to say better. Be organized with your files so that you can pay attention to your own performance rather than finding how you're going to bring other people's performances in. And the third thing is know your roadmap, stick to your roadmap, say it once, do it like that. After you say you're going to do it, then do it. Don't go back. Don't flutter around. Have a roadmap. Go with it. All right, that's enough clarity and organization. The final thing that I want to talk about today is this issue of voice in speaking and the question of who is speaking and who are they speaking to and in the name of who. I think that this is an important issue for speaking, right? Because the issue of speaking for others or who we're speaking for is inherent always in the idea of when you're speaking, who are you representing? Are you representing yourself? Are you representing others? What is it that you're here to do? What is your voice meant to be? What are you trying to do with your voice? So there is this thing called the speaking for others critique, and David alluded to it in his lecture last night, and he called it the issue of voices. And it is this question of whether or not you as a debater or as a privileged person or as an academic or whatever has the right to speak for anybody else like a Native American about what their situation is, what their problem is, what they want to have solve it. And anything that the affirmative might say, or even the negative might say, that identifies in some situation some sort of true objective statement through their discourse, through their speech, about what is and what is not Native American. Does that make sense? Does everybody sort of get that? And a lot of people say that the problem with this is that silences those voices, right? That there is no monolithic Native American voice, that there are many different voices. When we speak for others, we speak as one voice, as if that represented them, and that silences all of the voices of dissent within that. Additionally, since most of us aren't Native Americans, when we speak for Native Americans, oftentimes we speak from an ethnocentric and privileged position and fail to recognize issues that Native Americans may have that our experiences could never bring into light and could never be adequately dealt with in our own speech and discourse. So there are many authors who say that you should not speak for others, that you should find some other way to engage the other, but you should not speak for them. You should not speak in the name of advocating some sort of policy for them or an ethic or something that we're supposed to do. And so David says that a lot of Native Americans don't necessarily agree with this, and whether or not that's true will probably not be that important this year during the debate year, because people will still run that argument on you whether or not all Native Americans really believe that people should speak for them or not. So you should be careful when you're speaking about Native Americans, for Native Americans, what you're doing with this speech. Are you advocating for them? Are you speaking in the name of them? Does the linguistic structure that you choose to use assume that you're representing a whole category of people? And you should be careful with that. And you should try, perhaps, to represent them in some sort of different way that is not such a speaking for, in the name of, or whatever. As Routledge has noted, speaking for others raises the issue of how the voices of others are to be represented, the extent to which these voices are interwoven with persona or narrator, the degree of authorial power regarding who initiates the research, who decides on textual arrangements, and who decides on which voices are heard, and the power relations involved in the cultural capital conferred by specialist knowledge. It is all too easy for academics to claim solidarity with the oppressed and act as relays for their voices within social scientific discourse. This raises the danger of an uncritical alignment with resistors on the assumption that they know all there is to know without the intervention of intellectuals, and hence an academic's role becomes that of helping them seize the right to speak. Some alternatives to this might be conceiving of what you're doing as not speaking for them, but speaking to them. Geriatric Spivak defines this as a speaking to, in which the intellectual neither abnegates his nor her discursive role, nor presumes an authenticity of the oppressed, but still allows for the possibility that the oppressed will produce a counter-sentence that can then suggest a new historical narrative. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, and I grapple with this every day in my speech and my understanding about what I'm doing here, about what debate means, what I'm doing in my life, whatever. When I'm speaking about issues of oppression and otherness, I think about this speaking to. And I don't know exactly what it means, but I think that it means things like, when I say things, maybe I have to be somewhat self-reflexive and say, you know what, I know that my speech probably does a whole lot of violence. I remember Sarah Snyder saying this in her speech last night. At the very end, she said, I'm saying disgusting things, and I know it, and I don't want to do it, but I'm doing it anyway, and I'm so sorry. And please, if you know what I'm doing, call me out on it. This is the sort of self-reflexivity that I think that Geriatric Spivak is talking about. That we need to leave open the possibility that we don't know all there is to know, and that we need to do this with our speech. We need to let people know that we are not speaking just as some God who has a bird's eye view and knows the situation. We're talking because we need to talk. We're saying because we need to say something, but we don't know everything we need to say, but we're saying something. So please, once I say it, tell me what I've said wrong. Leave that space open to be debated about it. And that's what you're here to do, debate, right? So let people know that you're there to debate. So that's all I pretty much have to say. I have some handouts. They just have some tips like bring lozenges, little things that you want to remember before you go to tournaments about speaking to help you out. Does anybody have any questions?